Hey, welcome back to another video. I'm Ivan Calderon, and today we're going to be reviewing the Atom by PreSonus. So if you've been following the channel for a while, then you know that I love to make beats using physical hardware. Now there's nothing wrong if you like to click your notes in, that's totally fine. But for me, I grew up playing instruments, so being able to incorporate some of those physical characteristics into my beat making is essential for me. Now whenever I make beats, to me it's really important to have a MIDI keyboard for melodies and a beat pad for drums. And for the better part of the last 8 to 10 years, I've been using the same two pieces of hardware in those categories, and that being the Akai MK61 and the Maschine MK1. Now in the past couple weeks, my Maschine finally gave out on me, and I was going to repurchase another one, an MK3, because I'm familiar with the Maschine platform. In any case, at the end, I decided to go with the PreSonus Atom, and I am loving it. So today I want to do a deep dive as to what this thing is, what it does, and why maybe you'll love it too. Before we get started though, quick disclaimer. I am not being paid by PreSonus to do this review. However, they did send me this unit for free, so a huge shout out to them. But anyway, without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, so for this review, I'm gonna divide it into 4 sections. Form factor, functionality, a demo of what you can do with the Atom, and then finally I'll end it with my overall thoughts and improvement recommendations. To get it out the way, the Atom retails for $150, which is a super competitive price compared to similar items out on the market. When you purchase an Atom, you will get the unit itself along with a USB cable that will not only power it up, but also connect it to your computer. Whenever you register the Atom, you'll also get access to Studio One Artist for free, and that'll be available to you in your PreSonus account. But okay, starting off with form factor, the first thing that I noticed is that this thing is tiny. And whenever you put it next to my old MK1 Maschine, this is when you can really tell how small this thing is. The dimensions of the Atom are a little under 1x8x8 with a total weight of about 1 pound. The unit itself has 16 polyphonic RGB pads with aftertouch, and they feel amazing. I'll be doing a dedicated video comparing the Atom with the Maschine, but for now, all you have to know is that these pads are very similar to the ones on the Maschine. Additionally, the Atom also has 4 programmable encoders at the top of the unit. Now, what separates the Atom from the rest of the beat pads, in my opinion, is that not only is it a quality beat pad, but it's also a DAW controller. If you take a look at the side of the Atom, you'll see an array of buttons that will allow you to control your DAW software. The pads themselves will also offer a secondary function that will activate depending on what window you are in. We're going to be diving deep into what each of these buttons do in a minute, but for now, let's do a quick overview. So starting on the top left, we have a section called Song, and here you have a setup and a set loop button. Below that, we have an event section, and it has an editor and a nudge/quantize button. Below that, we have an instrument section, and that houses the show hide button, the preset/focus button, and the bank button. Below that, we have a mode section that has a full level and note repeat button. And then finally, at the very bottom, we have a shift button that will allow you to trigger those secondary functions. On the right-hand side, we have a navigation section with buttons including up, down, left, right, select, and zoom. Below that, we have a dedicated setup button that will allow you to control the advanced setup functions of the Atom. And finally, at the bottom right, we have a transport section that includes a click/count in button, a record/save button, a play/loop button, and a stop/undo button. As mentioned before, the pads also offer secondary functions, and that includes opening and closing your browser, setting the tempo for your session, setting the loop for your session, duplicating and deleting events and notes, setting the velocity of notes, and even setting the note value of your note repeat. Okay, now that you're a little bit more familiar with the Atom, let's go ahead and plug it in, bring up Studio One, and see what it can do. Now, plugging in this unit is as simple as taking the USB cable that came with it, plugging one end into your computer and the other to the back of the unit. Now, the Atom can be used with any DAW, but the beautiful part about using it with Studio One is that as long as you're on the latest firmware update, everything should map out automatically as soon as you plug it in. What this ultimately means is that you no longer have to go into the back end of the settings and set this up as an external keyboard. All you have to do, again, as long as you're on the latest firmware update, is plug it in and everything maps out automatically. Now, whenever you plug in your Atom into your computer, the pads will turn blue, and all this means is that it's ready to go. Whenever you plug it in and bring it up in Studio One on an empty track, they'll turn this purple color, and again, this is just a standby mode. Now, the Atom has this very useful keyboard mode that will pull itself up automatically the moment you load it up onto a VST. So if you take a look at my unit, that's exactly what I've done, and you'll see that the pads now have turned yellow, blue, and orange. Now the yellow pads on here represent the white keys on a keyboard, while the blue pads represent the black keys. If you take a look at the top right, you'll see 2 orange pads, and these are your octave up and octave down buttons. Now what you'll notice is that at the default position, these 2 will always match in color, but they will change as you go up or down to let you know where exactly on the keyboard you are playing. And of course, because the pads are polyphonic and they are pressure or velocity sensitive, you can in fact play chords. Not only does the Atom work well with VSTs like I showed you, but it also pairs up perfectly with Impact XT. Impact is Studio One's native drum sampler, and whenever you pull it up, you'll be able to see that the pads match up in color with whatever color you have on the actual software. Now right now I have all of them in white, but you can also go into here and change the color, and as you can see, that changes on the actual Atom itself. But in any case, whenever you load up some drum one-shots into the Impact software, you will be able to control them through the hardware. Okay, now that was a brief overview of the pads, but now let's talk about the rest of the buttons because this is where it gets interesting. I'm gonna go in order from top left, so if we take a look at the first section here, this is a song section. If you hit the setup button, you'll notice that the pads now turn a different color. Before we dive in though, I do wanna point out that although you can use the up and down navigation buttons here to scroll through your tracks, while in this mode, you can also use the first encoder to do the same thing. The second encoder as well has a function, and that is the tempo. So again, while in this mode, you can turn this to increase or decrease the tempo. But okay, moving back down to the pads. While in this mode, I can press pad 13 and that'll bring up my browser. I can tap pad 14 and manually set in the tempo. So take a look at the tempo meter here. I can use pad 9 to duplicate an event or note, and then I can use pad 10 to delete it. At the bottom, you can see that pads 1 through 8 also have different colors, and these are by default programmed to do specific things. Now you can reprogram these pads, but by default, pad 1 is set to duplicate a track, pad 2 is set to select all, pad 3 is set to mute, pad 4 is set to solo, pad 5 is used to insert a pattern event, pad 6 is set to duplicate a pattern variation, pad 7 is set to create a new pattern variation, and finally pad 8 is set to delete a pattern variation. Now like I said, you can leave these pads the way they are, but they are in fact user programmable. Now to do that, all you have to do is go over to your mixer, then go over to the left side where it says external, go down to where it says Atom, pull down the drop down arrow, and hit edit. This will bring up the external devices window for the Atom, and here not only can you see what they do in case you need a refresher, but if you right click, you'll be able to unassign or assign them to do something else. This is also the window where you'll be able to assign a function to the encoders here. While we're here talking about reprogramming things, if you want to program or reprogram the encoders at the top, all you have to do is first move one, and then right click on a parameter on Studio One, and set it to there. And of course, in the window we have pulled up here, you'll be able to see what that encoder is set to. Now moving one down in that same area, you're gonna have the set loop function. Now while in this mode, you can use the fourth encoder to move your cursor left or right, and basically then use the up or down arrows in the navigation section to set your start and end point. So for example, let's say that I wanna set my loop starting at the 1, which you normally would. I would take my fourth encoder, drag it there, press the up button to set my start point, and then move down to wherever I want my endpoint to be. In my case, it'd be the 5, and then press the down button. From there, I can press the shift button and then this play button here, which doubles up as a loop activation button, and that will activate my loop. Finally, from there, I can use these 2 pads to move that loop right or left. If I ever need to extend it, all I have to do is choose my new endpoint and press the down arrow. Same thing for the beginning. If you want a new start point, go to there and press the up button. Moving down to the next section, we have the event category. Now here we have 2 buttons, the editor and the nudge/quantize. If I press the editor button, that'll bring up my editor window. Now once you enter this mode, you can see that we now have pads 9 through 12 lit up, and they now allow me to do certain things like duplicate a note, delete a note, decrease the velocity, or increase the velocity. The next button below that is the nudge/quantize button, and pretty much what happens when I press that and I have a note selected, I can then use the left or right arrows down here to move the note left or right. I can also hold the shift key and press that same button to quantize my notes based on the note value of my grid. Now to close the editor window, all you have to do is press shift and editor. Moving on down, we have the instrument section, and here we have 3 buttons: the show hide button, the preset/focus button, and then the bank button. Now the first button is pretty self-explanatory. If you press it once, it'll bring up whatever VST you are currently on. Press it again to hide it. The second button down is the preset button, and if you hold this and then use the up or down buttons on the navigation section, you can cycle through the presets on your Studio One VSTs. Finally, the last button here is the bank button, and this is used with impact. So if I hold that, I can cycle or activate different banks in the software itself. Moving on down, we have the last section called mode, and here we have two buttons, full level and note repeat. Now the full level button, all this basically does is it allows you to trigger whatever sound the pad has at full velocity. Now for example, if I play this kick here, the velocity or the intensity will depend on how hard I hit this pad. But if I have the full level turned on, it'll hit at 100% velocity every single time. This mode is very useful to me, at least when playing drums, because usually you want to have your drum set at 100% velocity, and having this button turned on while you play just kind of reduces one more step along the road later on. Finally, we have the note repeat button, and this has to be one of my favorite features. So the way it works is that first you want to select whatever sound you want it to affect. So for me, I want it to be the hi-hat, then press the note repeat, and immediately we get pads 1 through 8 light up with different note values. Finally, the last button on this entire side is a shift button, and again, this is what allows you to trigger those secondary functions for most of the things on this unit. Moving on over to the right side of the unit, we have a navigation section that houses buttons like up, down, left, right, select, and zoom. At the bottom, we have a dedicated setup button that'll bring up the advanced setup functions for the Atom. Finally, at the very bottom, we have the transport section, and these will all have a secondary function. So for example, if you click the first button once, that'll activate or deactivate the metronome. If you shift click, that'll activate the pre-count, and you can see that here on the screen. I'll show it to you. Right now it is off. Shift click, now it is on. And for the ones who are unfamiliar, the pre-count is basically the count in before it actually starts recording. The second button down is the record button, so if I hit that, it'll start recording. However, if I shift click, it'll save my session. The third button down is the play button, but as I showed you, if you shift click, it'll activate or deactivate your loop. Finally, the last button here is the stop button, and if you press that, of course, it stops the cursor, but if you shift click, it'll undo the last action you did. Okay, so now that you're familiar with the Atom and what it can do, I wanna show you how easy it is to make beats with it. Now I'm gonna be showing you this using two methods. Number one is my favorite way of making beats and how I make beats all the time, and that's using the timeline on Studio One. And then the second method is using the pattern editor. Okay, so jumping into Studio One, the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set my tempo. Now I know that I wanna make something along the lines of like R&B and pop, so I'm gonna go ahead and put that in. So to do that, I'm gonna hit the setup button under the song section, and then under the tempo button, which is pad 14, I'm gonna tap that in. So we got 75. That's a little too slow for me, so I think I'm actually gonna do this in double time. So 75, double that. Let's actually bring it down a little to like maybe 144. Perfect. From there, the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set my loop. So I'm gonna go to the set loop button, go to the beginning. So here, press the up button to set my start point, and then I'm gonna go down to here and press the down button to set my end point, then shift and play to activate my loop. From there, we can back out of here. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring in an instrument. So let's go ahead and press the setup button again, browser, and then use the first encoder to select an instrument. I think to keep it in the family, I'm gonna choose a Mai Tai. So I hit that and then hit select. So with Mai Tai open, we can now press the preset button and then the down button on the navigation section to scroll through the presets. I actually wanna jump sections, so just to save time, I'm gonna use my mouse to go down to the pads. And let's just start there. That actually sounds pretty good. Okay, so I like that sound, so I'm gonna go ahead and hide the VST. Press the stop button, go to the beginning of the timeline, and let's make sure our metronome is on. It is. Let's record. Now from here, I can press the record button to stop recording, editor to open up my editor, and then shift nudge to quantize. Now if you notice, there are 3 notes on that second chord that weren't place properly on the grid. So what I'm gonna do while in editor mode is I'm going to use the right arrow here on the navigation section, or the right button rather, and then to select the notes that I want, then I'm gonna press nudge and then right again, let it go to the next note, right again, and then right again. Perfect. Now for me, I have a pretty good starting point, so I'm gonna go ahead and close the editor, shift editor to close that out. And I'm gonna start going over to the drums. So I'm gonna go one up, get out of the editor window, and then show the VST. Let's record some drums. Same thing, I'm gonna hide the VST, press record to stop recording, open up the editor, shift nudge to quantize. Let's go ahead and check it. All right, sounds good. From here, let's go ahead and just keep going. I'm gonna show the VST, and now I wanna record the hi-hats. So I'm gonna tap that, then hit the note repeat. Actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and bring up the velocity of all of these up a bit. So I'm gonna go over to the editor, press the velocity button to go all the way up. Perfect. From there, we can go back to the drums. Show the VST. I'm gonna hit full level on mode. That way, every time I trigger these pads, the sound is played at full velocity. So once that's done, select my hi-hat, hit note repeat. Okay, perfect, let's record. All right, so from there, I wanna add a crash and an open hat. So let me just locate where they are. And let's keep this going. Quantize it. Let me turn off the metronome. Okay, good. All right, so I think I'm done with the drums. Let's go ahead and move on to another instrument. So let me go ahead and press Shift Editor to close that out. And I'm gonna bring in, I think, another Mai Tai. So setup, browser, we're already there. Select, and here we are. Now for this, I'm looking for more of like a lead or something like a bell. So let's go ahead and see, there's a bell section. Let's see what we got. Now I want these to be more of like accent hits. So let's see what we can do. Okay, so that was a timeline method. The other way is using the pattern editor. Now to get that started, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over and actually just delete the drums because pretty much the melodies are recorded the same way. So I'm gonna select my drums here, hit the setup button, delete, and then while I'm here, I'm gonna press pad number 5 to create a new pattern event. Now what I'm actually gonna do is extend this out to about there, and I'm gonna duplicate it, and I'll show you guys why in a minute. From there, hit the editor button, and now we get presented with this screen. Now, if you've ever worked with step sequencers, then this is gonna be really familiar, but essentially you have 16 steps, and if you don't have an atom, you can use your mouse to place the notes where you want them to go. However, if you do have an atom like I do, you can actually place them using the pads themselves because the pads are linked to these 16 steps on the screen. But okay, the first thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna extend this out to 32 steps, and I'll probably start out with the snare. So because we are in double time, the snare goes on the 3rd. That would be pad number 9. If I hit the right button here, I can go to the second half. So the next 16 steps, press the 9 again. and then we get this. Perfect, so from there, let me go back to the first section. Let me go up or down to the close hat. I had quarter notes, so I'm gonna place them here. Go to the next half, place them there. Perfect. Let's go up to the kick and let me place one. Let me go back to the first half, place one there. Maybe one there. Moving on, we can go down to the open hat. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and place it, let's do here. Go to the next half, there. Now this sounds good, but I actually want to add a second kick pattern. So the way to do that is I'm gonna go over to that second pattern event, make sure that's highlighted, hit the setup button on the song section and then pattern number 6, and that effectively creates a new pattern variation. Now from here, I can actually go back over to my editor window and let's make sure we're on the right sound. So the kick, and we can start placing the other one where we would like. So for me, that'd be here. And now we have the first pattern, second pattern. Last thing I'm gonna do here is I'm going to add a crash at the beginning of that first pattern. Now from here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back over to the timeline, hit the shift key and then the right key or the left, depending on where you are, to highlight both of these events and then hit duplicate. All of this while being under the setup mode on the song section. Okay, last few tweaks. What I'm gonna do now is go over to that third pattern event block, and while I'm in the setup button on the song section, hit pattern number 6 to create pattern version number 3, then go over one more and hit that pad again to create pattern version number 4. The reason for doing this is because I'm gonna open up pattern version number 3 and take away that crash because we don't need it. Then I'm gonna go over to pattern version number 4 and let's go over to the close hat and I'm gonna add some rolls. Perfect. So now the whole beat sounds like this. So there you have it, 2 different ways to create beats and specifically with your drums. Now, obviously, once you get in here, you're gonna start to develop your own workflow and there's many different ways to do things. But what I love about the Atom is that regardless of how you like to work, it makes everything so much easier. Okay, so my overall thoughts. I really like the Atom. Again, not only is it a quality beat pad, but it's also a DAW controller, which for me is extremely helpful because it allows me to create faster, and that's really the key here. There are a few things that I would change, like for example, the encoders are a bit too sensitive for me. It is a lot easier to use the encoders for navigation, to scroll up and down, but oftentimes I find myself using the navigation buttons instead, simply because the encoders are way too sensitive. I know this is kind of nitpicking, but if there was a way to reduce the sensitivity, that would be amazing. Second, as I mentioned before, there is a way for you to program these encoders to do certain things, and the thing that makes the most sense to me to program them to is volume and pan on a track. This is useful because maybe as I'm producing, I want to turn something down or pan it left and right to get a better idea of what I'm creating. As it stands, you can in fact program these encoders to manipulate the volume and the pan of a track, but it's on a track per track basis. This means that if I program them to one track and then move down to another, they will still only be programmed to that previous track. Now, maybe we're kind of getting into a gray area here because I know these are some of the things that PreSonus's other products like their Fader port and their Studio Live series, so their mixing consoles, things that they do very well, and maybe they're trying to distinguish and separate these two product lines. But for me, as someone who is not a mixer, as someone who's a producer and a beat maker, having the Atom do those things would be amazing. I also wish there was a way to program the encoders on a VST by VST basis. As it stands, you can do that, but only with Studio One native VSTs like Presence and MyTi, not with third-party VSTs and plugins. Maybe this gets a little bit more complicated from a software development side, but again, in a perfect world, that's what I would love to see. Overall though, I really love the Atom, and I think for $150, it's a no-brainer if you use Studio One. Now, I know the most common question here is going to be, well, what's better, the Maschine or the Atom? And I would say to you, that's the wrong question to ask. Both of these products are really, really great. However, they're tailored to two different types of workflows. Now, I'll be doing a video very soon comparing these two products, but for now, what I will say is that I think that the Atom is essential for anyone who makes beats in Studio One. Well, there you have it, my review and demo of the Atom by PreSonus. Now, before you leave, I wanna give you something extra. If you click the first link in the description, you're gonna find my production toolkit, which is basically a little care package for producers. It comes with 5 sample loops, all the major and minor scales, and their triad chords in MIDI format. You can use these tools to boost your production and help you get more done in the studio. And again, it's 100% free, so make sure to pick up your copy down below. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, like this video if you liked, and subscribe if you're not already. But I'll see you on the next one.